A widow, left with nothing but heartbreak, collapses in a snowstorm on the wild frontier and wakes in the care of a quiet rancher. In his arms, she'll discover that even in the loneliest places, love can still take root. Let's find out.
Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got more powerful stories coming every single day, and you don't want to miss them. Now, let's begin.
The wind had a cruel voice that morning, carrying the last of autumn's breath across the barren hills. Inside the small log cabin, Abigail Monroe stood motionless, her hands gripping the folded letter that had shattered what remained of her world. The ink had already begun to smudge where her tears had fallen. "You have no legal claim to this property. Vacate immediately." It was signed in the sharp, cold hand of her father-in-law. The fire in the hearth had burned itself to ash. Shadows clung to the corners of the room like old ghosts. Abby's gaze drifted over the little home her late husband Henry had built. The hand-carved table, the rocking chair that creaked in every windstorm, the shelf that still held his worn hat. Every corner whispered of him. But he was gone, buried beneath the same ground that now rejected her. She moved slowly, packing what life she could into a single carpet bag. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a faded photograph, and the quilt she'd stitched the winter before Henry died. Her fingers trembled as she touched the door handle. Beyond it waited a world that had turned its back. Abby took one last look at the cabin, her home, her heart, then stepped outside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click that sounded far too much like goodbye. The horizon stretched, endless and gray, and the wind stole her breath as it pushed her forward. She had no plan, no destination, only the will to keep walking. When life leaves you with nothing but memories and courage, would you still have the strength to walk away? Stay with us. Abby's story is just beginning. The wind bit harder the farther Abby Monroe walked. The sun was pale and distant, a weak glow above miles of frozen sage. Her boots, worn from years of use, split along the seams, letting snow soak her stockings. Every step felt heavier than the last. But stopping wasn't an option. There was nowhere to stop for. She passed the edge of Bitter Creek, its small cluster of buildings crouched beneath a gray sky. The boarding house keeper shook her head, murmuring, "We've got no room for strays." The general store clerk looked away when Abby asked about work. Even the saloon keeper, whose smile reached everyone else, avoided her eyes. Widow Monroe. The name had become a stain. By mid-afternoon, clouds gathered low and fast. The road turned white, the wind sharp enough to cut through her coat. She knocked at a farmhouse door. A woman peeked through the curtain, then closed it tight. Another house offered worse, an old man's grin and words that froze her blood. "A pretty thing like you could earn a warm bed easy." Abby turned away, her dignity her only remaining possession. As daylight faded, snow thickened. Her legs ached, her breath came ragged. The vast land swallowed her footsteps one by one. When the first flake touched her cheek, she thought it might be mercy, soft, quiet, numbing. She thought she'd lost everything. But destiny was riding closer than she knew. Don't turn away now. The storm is only beginning. The storm came down from the mountains like a living thing, a white beast with claws of wind and a roar that swallowed every sound. Abby Monroe fought to stay upright, but the snow drove against her face so fiercely she could hardly see her own hands. The sky had vanished, the road gone. There was only the blinding whirl of white and the ache of cold sinking deep into her bones. Her thin gloves were stiff with ice. She tried to shelter her face, to press onward toward anything that looked like safety, but there was nothing, only the endless scream of the wind. She thought she saw a light in the distance, then realized it was only lightning flashing over the hills. Her bag slipped from her numb fingers. She didn't bother picking it up. Abby stumbled through the drifts until her knees buckled. The snow came higher now, clinging to her skirt and pulling her down. She crawled to a half-collapsed barn, its roof sagging, walls leaning. The wood groaned like it was alive, like it had one more breath left. She huddled inside, clutching her arms around her chest, her teeth chattering too hard for prayer. Her mind drifted to Henry, his laughter, his hands, his promise to always come home. Maybe this was her way of joining him. Her eyes grew heavy, her pulse faint. She whispered, "I'm sorry, Henry," and laid her head against the frozen ground. Somewhere through the storm, faint but steady, came the sound of hooves. She thought it was a dream, the wind playing tricks on a dying woman. Then, just before the dark claimed her, a voice cut through the snow, rough and desperate. "Hold on! Don't you quit now!" The last thing she felt was strong arms lifting her from the drift and the warmth of a blanket wrapping around her frozen body. Warmth. That was the first thing Abby Monroe felt when she woke, a soft, steady heat seeping into her bones. For a moment, she thought she'd died and heaven had firelight. Then she heard the crackle of wood and the low voice of a man humming under his breath. Her eyes fluttered open. The world came into focus. Rough-hewn log walls, shelves lined with jars, the smell of coffee and pine smoke. A heavy blanket covered her up to the chin. Near the hearth, a tall man stirred a pot over the fire. He turned when she moved, his face shadowed beneath dark hair, dusted with silver. "You're awake," he said quietly. "Wasn't sure you'd be." His voice was rough but kind, like gravel worn smooth by years of use. Abby tried to sit up, panic flickering through her, alone, weak, in a stranger's home. The man raised a hand gently. "Easy now. You're safe here." He set a steaming mug beside her. "Name's Luke Carver. Found you half buried out near the ridge. Storm nearly took you." Abby's voice came hoarse. "Why would you help me?" He shrugged, turning back to the fire. "Wouldn't have sat right to leave you there." She looked down at her trembling hands, then to the snow still whispering against the window. A stranger had saved her when the world she knew had turned her away. Sometimes salvation rides in quietly, wrapped in flannel and kindness. Stay with us. Something more than survival is about to begin. Snow still blanketed the valley when Abby Monroe was strong enough to stand. She dressed in borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame and stepped to the door of Luke Carver's cabin. The air was crisp, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. She turned to thank him, but he was already outside, repairing a broken fence post like the storm had never happened. "You're lucky," he said without looking up. "Another hour out there and you wouldn't be talking now." "I don't feel lucky," Abby murmured. Her voice caught on the wind. "I should go before I overstay." Luke leaned on the fence rail, studying her quietly. "Go where? Bitter Creek's snowed in, and the road west is worse." She had no answer. He nodded toward a small cabin a few hundred yards away. "Old foreman's place. Needs cleaning, but it's dry. You can stay there till spring." "I can't take charity." "Then don't," he said simply. "I could use an extra pair of hands. You help out here, it's fair trade." Abby hesitated, pride warring with exhaustion. Finally, she nodded. "I can cook, mend, and write. My mother taught me." Luke raised a brow. "You can write?" A small smile touched his face. "Then you can help me with the ranch accounts. Numbers and I don't get along." She almost smiled back. For the first time in months, someone saw her as more than a burden. As she followed him toward the little cabin, the snow crunching beneath their boots, she felt a faint spark of something she hadn't dared to feel since Henry's death: hope. The days on the Circle M Ranch settled into a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Abby Monroe rose with the dawn, the frost still silver on the windows, and crossed the yard to the main house where Luke Carver was already at work. She mended harnesses, washed tin plates, and kept the small foreman's cabin swept and warm. By noon, she'd be at Luke's table, ledger open, carefully tallying feed and wages, while he watched with quiet respect. They spoke little at first. Silence suited them both, hers born from grief, his from years of solitude. But as the winter sun lingered longer, words began to slip between the silences. Stories of their childhoods, of lives once filled with laughter that now felt a lifetime away. Some evenings, Luke would hand her a cup of coffee, and they'd sit on the porch steps, the horizon painted in copper light. Once, she caught him smiling at something she'd said, a small, startled smile that looked like it hadn't been used in years. When she laughed, the sound surprised them both. For a fleeting moment, the ranch didn't feel so lonely. Spring was still far off, yet Abby began to sense warmth in places that snow could not reach, in the steady rhythm of work, in the scent of pine smoke, and in the quiet companionship of the man who had pulled her back from the edge of death. Word traveled fast across the Wyoming plain, faster than wagons or wind. Before long, the folks in Bitter Creek were whispering about the widow who lived with Luke Carver out at the Circle M. They said she cooked his meals, kept his books, and shared his roof. By the time the talk reached Luke's ranch, it had turned ugly. That morning, Abby was hanging laundry behind the foreman's cabin when she heard horses. 4 men rode in, townsmen she half recognized, led by Frank Dalton, the storekeeper whose smile never reached his eyes. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Monroe," he drawled, swinging down from his horse. "Didn't take you long to find yourself a new arrangement." Abby's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I work here, that's all." Frank's smirk deepened. "Folks in town figure there's work, and then there's what you're doing." Before she could answer, Luke stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His jaw was tight, his voice even. "You've said enough, Dalton. This is my land. You can leave." The men hesitated. Frank spat into the dust. "You'll regret taking her in, Carver. Women like that bring trouble." Luke moved closer, eyes like flint. "Get off my property before I show you what trouble really looks like." They rode off, laughing, but Abby's hands still trembled. Luke glanced her way, his expression softening. "Don't let their words touch you," he said quietly. "They don't know what real decency is." When gossip turns cruel and courage meets fire, will their bond hold strong? Stay with us to see what happens next. The air on the ranch felt different after that day. Heavier, quieter. Abby Monroe kept to her chores, but every creak of a saddle or distant shout made her flinch. The words those men had thrown at her still echoed like wind rattling an empty window frame. She'd lived through loss, hunger, and cold, but nothing stung like shame she hadn't earned. That evening, as the sun sank low over the hills, Luke Carver found her sitting by the fence line, mending a torn shirt with trembling hands. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees,
watching the last light fade. "They'll talk, no matter what you do," he said finally. "People like Dalton need someone to look down on." Abby's needle paused. "I thought coming here meant starting over. I didn't think the past would follow me." Luke's tone softened. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of. You work harder than most men I know." She gave a shaky laugh. "That's not saying much out here." He looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time in months, his face broke into a smile. It wasn't wide or easy, but it was real, a light cutting through years of silence. Without thinking, Abby smiled back. For a heartbeat, the world felt still, peaceful, like the storm and gossip and grief had all fallen away. For the first time since Henry's death, she didn't feel invisible.
The night was calm at first, too calm. A sliver of moon hung over the hills, the air sharp with cold. Abby Monroe had just banked the fire in the foreman's cabin when she heard it. Distant hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. Then another and another. Her breath caught. She stepped outside, shawl tight around her shoulders. Down the ridge, a line of torches flickered like angry stars. Shadows moved with them, men on horseback, voices low and mean. Luke Carver appeared from the barn, rifle already in hand. "Get inside," he said. "No," Abby whispered. "I won't hide." The riders came into view, Frank Dalton and his men again, faces lit by fire and malice. "We warned you, Carver," Frank shouted. "You think you can keep her here and shame this town?" Luke leveled his rifle, calm and steady. "You take one more step, Dalton, and I swear—" Before he could finish, Abby strode beside him, shotgun in hand. The firelight caught her face, pale, fierce, unflinching. "You'll ride back the way you came," she said, "or you'll answer to me first." For a long moment no one moved. Then came the sound of galloping, the marshal and his deputies thundering in from the east. "That's enough!" he barked. The mob scattered, swallowed by the dark. Abby's hands shook once the danger passed, but Luke's were steady as he lowered her shotgun. "You were brave," he murmured. She looked up at him, breathless. "I was scared." "Brave usually is," he said. "Would you stand your ground beside the one who saved you? Don't turn away now. The storm inside them has only just begun."
Dawn crept slow over the valley, soft light spilling across the snow like gold dust. The yard was quiet now, only smoke rising from the barn where Luke Carver had stayed to check the horses after the night's attack. Abby Monroe found him on the porch, a bruise shadowing his jaw, his hat tipped low. "You should be resting," she said softly. He looked up with that tired, half smile. "You sound like someone who almost got herself shot." Abby lowered her eyes. "I couldn't just stand there, not after everything you've done for me." Luke studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You don't scare easy. That's rare out here." She knelt beside him, dipping a cloth in a bowl of warm water and pressing it gently to his cheek. For a moment neither spoke. The world beyond the porch faded. Only the crackle of frost, the faint breath of the horses, the quiet heartbeat between them. "I should leave soon," she whispered finally. "Go where?" His voice was low, almost breaking. "You've already found home." Their eyes met, steady, unguarded, full of everything they'd both been too afraid to say. The morning light caught in her hair, and he reached out, brushing a strand from her face. He whispered the words she never expected to hear. "Stay with me. If this moment touched your heart, share it, and stay a little longer. Winter loosened its grip slowly, as if reluctant to release the land. The snow melted into silver streams that whispered through the pastures, and the valley of the Circle M Ranch came alive again. For Abby Monroe, each sunrise felt like a small miracle. She no longer woke to silence and grief, but to the low hum of ranch life, the soft nicker of horses, the crackle of a fire, and sometimes Luke Carver's quiet whistle drifting through the morning air. She planted a small garden beside the foreman's cabin, her fingers deep in the thawing earth. Luke would bring her coffee each morning, setting it on the fence post before heading out to work. Their words were few, but their glances said everything. Comfort, respect, something tender still growing. Sometimes, as the light stretched long across the plains, they'd walk the property line together. He spoke of his lost wife and son, the fever that took them, and how he'd buried his heart beside them. Abby listened, and in her listening he found peace. And when she spoke of Henry, of love cut short and dreams that froze in winter, Luke didn't try to mend her pain, he just stood beside it, steady as the land itself. The thaw wasn't just in the soil, it was in them, two wounded souls learning how to live again.
Spring rolled over the valley in a rush of green and gold. Wildflowers painted the hillsides, and the river sang louder with each passing day. Abby Monroe stood beneath the old cottonwood near the ranch, its branches heavy with new leaves. The garden she'd planted bloomed behind her, neat rows of life, where once there had been only snow and silence. She heard the soft tread of boots before she saw him. Luke Carver approached, a nervous calm in his stride. He carried no hat, no rifle, only a small wooden box in his hand. When he stopped before her, the wind caught between them, carrying the faint scent of lilac and dust. "Abby," he said quietly, "you came here with nothing, but somehow you gave me everything I thought I'd lost." Her eyes filled, but she didn't speak. He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring, one that had belonged to his mother. "Stay," he whispered, "not as my guest, but as my wife." For a moment, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Then Abby nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks as she smiled. "Yes, Luke, I'll stay." He slid the ring onto her finger, and together they turned toward the wide, open plains, a future as vast as the sky itself. Sometimes the wildest lands hide the gentlest hearts, and every ending is only the beginning of another kind of love.
Thank you for watching till the end. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. We'll be dropping brand new powerful stories every single day. See you on the next one.